I think because we're...
So just like to introduce Chris. So Chris Beanland is a writer and journalist. He focuses primarily on architecture and travel. He's written books on a wide range of topics, spanning brutalism and outdoor swimming pool architecture. And I think, apparently Chris saying he didn't get a chance to do many talks on the outdoor pools, the Lido book, so I'm sure that could be something he could return to talk on. He's also written widely for a number of national publications, including The Guardian, The Independent, The Telegraph. And today he's talking about his book Unbuilt, which I can physically hold and show you here, which was published by Batsford in this year, 2021. A final biographical point, Chris is actually a native of Yorkshire. He's from Bradford.
Very important to point that out, thank you.
Almost Leeds, not quite. But he also studied in Leeds, so he's familiar with the area. So I'll hand it over to Chris.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you all for coming. It's been a wee while, probably for all of us, since we've been to anything like this, and a little while since I've done any of these, so please be gentle with me. But I'm sure you're going to enjoy this more than looking at Zoom. And I certainly am relishing doing this, and it's been really nice already to talk to so many people. I think it really makes a difference to have these events in person, to be able to catch up with people, to have these discussions. I love going to book talks as well. I think it really brings things to life. So it's wonderful to be here. I wanted to give my thanks at the start to Cliff and to the Leeds Modernists, to Lisa and Flo and everyone, Becky as well for helping out, and David for interviewing. It's really kind of everyone to be involved in helping to do this event. So thank you so much. It really means a lot to me, and it means a lot to me to have you guys all here as well. And I hope you have a really nice evening. So we're going to talk about my book, Unbuilt: Radical Visions of a Future That Never Arrived, which was out a couple of months ago. So I'm going to do a little talk. I'm going to run through some of the ideas that I talked about in the book, that I thought about in the book, and we're going to look at a few projects. There's a lot of projects in this book. I think there's like 50 or something, so there's lots more than we can talk about tonight. So we're just going to dip into a few things, and then towards the end we're going to focus more on Yorkshire and Leeds, and we're going to think about some ideas that people had for the city of Leeds and for other places in Yorkshire. And then, as David said, he's going to talk to me, and then you guys can give me your thoughts and questions as well. Some of the projects I'm going to talk about in a bit more length, and I'll read some extracts from the book, and others will just have a look at some of the images and things. But one of the things that I want to do in the book, as well as just looking at the examples of different projects that were never built or were partially built, was also to think about the ideas around the dreams that we have of what the future will be like. What have architects and planners envisaged for the future? What have philosophers kind of thought that the future would look like? How has technology affected those visions? And how have they been represented in the media and pop culture? And also in the age before we had computers, how were these ideas put across in collages and drawings like the one on the cover, which shows the plan for Lomex, the Lower Manhattan Expressway, where they wanted to demolish all of the Lower East Side and replace it with these freeways and these superstructures. So I thought I would read a little bit from the introduction. The introduction is more sort of thinking about the ideas and things. So I'll just read a little bit from there. This is the conclusion of the introduction. We must not lose faith in architecture as a symbol of what our short time on this planet represents. We cannot let ourselves become an epoch which leaves nothing to be discovered by future generations seeking information about the second dark age of the 2020s. Architecture's ideas are its power. Architecture's buildings are the promise writ large. Still, much will be unbuilt, just like much has been unbuilt, and the study of what's not there, what should be there, and what was meant to be there will enlighten and entertain as it does now. The dead can't speak to us, but we still read about them, and we still write about them. They haunt us with their lack of presence. Ghosts exist only in the human mind, I think, and only because we want to connect to something or someone. This obsession with plans, drawings, collages, the remains we find hidden behind trees, and the obsession with theories themselves comes from that same place. What if? What if we had done something differently? Dreams pose the same point. A kiss with someone we never managed it with, a journey to a place destroyed by natural disaster, a poem spoken to a now dead parent. We had the ideas and we still have them. Ideas are really all we have when all is said and done. They are what make us human. And if those wishes don't come true, who cares? Keep going, keep wishing, keep dreaming. So that's maybe a little taste of how the introduction is a bit more sort of thoughtful and it's a bit more philosophical. But let's launch into some projects. So we will start with this one, which is Birmingham. I'll read this section from the book. Birmingham's motto is forward. No other British city is so enthralled to progress. None so exuberantly destroyed its Victorian heritage in the 20th century to build a future city, and none regretted it so much in the 21st, demolishing all that post-war innovation to rebuild yet again in a corporate style, which can be best described as being as bland as biscuits without any chocolate. There were 1930s and 40s plans for a civic plaza with council buildings, cathedral, and BBC studios. This led to the 1964 plan for a civic centre surrounding Centenary Square and strung out along the end of Broad Street, which is now more famous for piss-ups and punch-ups. It called for student halls, a tower with a revolving restaurant, an exhibition centre, which one assumes would have been built instead of that favourite venue of the Conservative Party conference, the International Convention Centre. Inevitably a monorail, flats, library, car parks, a sports academy, offices, and even a planetarium. Everything would have been linked by skyways. The exhibition halls and Sky Tower would have been designed by James Roberts, and the rest by John Maiden, who's pictured here. In the event, the library was built by 1974 and became something of an icon. The library was the silent fulcrum around which the motorway madness swirled. But most of the plans, including water gardens, never materialised, and a slightly forlorn library was pulled down in 2015. Much of my novel, The Wall in the Head, which came out 2 years ago, takes place where the Civic Centre was due to stand at the library and where Alpha Tower and the studios for the local ITV concession ATV were built. Across the city, next to New Street Station, James Roberts' Rotunda still stands, and in fact, you can stay in one of its rooms. In 2008, it reopened after conversion from offices to residential, including a hotel with the best views over Birmingham. Some of my novel is set in Leeds as well. I'll say that. Okay, so let's move these wires a little. Let's move on to the next one. Actually, there's some more photos of Birmingham. This is the library before it was demolished. And in fact, the plans here for the 1940s plan for Birmingham Civic Centre. So this obviously came before this 60s version, but a very interesting plan as well, which was never realised. Next, we'll look at Berlin. a lot of what we do, I need to stand over here so you guys can see, don't I? Tell me if you can't see. And if anyone can't hear as well, just let me know. Lots of the projects that I talk about in the book came in that kind of post-war period when there was a lot of redevelopment and ambition and optimism around the world. Obviously, we're all here because we're interested in modern architecture, so a lot of it comes from that time, but a lot of what wasn't built comes from that time as well, if that makes sense. So there were various plans for Berlin. Obviously, the West Berlin plans were different to the East Berlin plans, so you can see a lot of difference in what the planners were thinking about on both sides of the wall. One of the things which caught my eye in Berlin, which was something that I've not seen before, was this. Rolling pavements. So it's basically what you would go on in the airport, like a travelator or something. But the idea was that they would put these in a tube and they would stretch the length of, I think they wanted to put it along the Kurfürstendamm, which is like the Oxford Street of West Berlin, where all the shops are, like KDV and those ones. And then they wanted to have connectors that would link the rolling pavements to the buildings. For any German speakers, they are the Rollender Gesteiger am Kurfürstendamm, the rolling pavements. And here we can see them going around the side of, I don't know if does anyone recognize this? Breitscheidplatz, which is, so the Bikini building in Berlin is, I think, here. So this is kind of the center of West Berlin. But yeah, they wanted to have these rolling pavements going across each side of Breitscheidplatz. This is the cathedral that was destroyed in the war, and then they built the octagonal tower. So yeah, that was one of the ideas for West Berlin. Here's another German idea. This was actually a project that I've been fascinated by for years. The Bauhaus kiosks that Herbert Bayer suggested. There's the one that's the cigarette shop and a cinema, and there were several others. I think they're very cute, and I think someone should definitely have a go at making those. Next project we'll look at is the ringways of London. This was actually based on an article that I wrote for The Independent a few years ago, and I was digging into the story of the ringways, and it was really something that caught my imagination. It was almost endless, really, the kind of plans that they had. One of the reasons that when I talk about in the book that I was interested in it was that I was living at the time in West London, very near to the Westway, and there's a junction where you can see the stubs of the road where it would have kind of gone off into the distance, and I wondered what was planned there, and also I was thinking a lot about the gappiness that you can see with cities and developments. I don't know about you, but I always wonder when I see a vacant area, I wonder what should have been there. Why is this area vacant? And certainly for the ringways, there were a lot of areas where they'd done demolitions and they'd kind of planned for what was going to go in there. obviously, these, even though they built fractions of the motorways, the full plan would have been a absolutely elephantine project. In fact, possibly the largest single construction project in British history, and possibly the single most expensive item of government expenditure in history too, perhaps. Though people can argue with me on that one. So we managed to get some well, you can see some interesting kind of photos here of how it would have looked in the city, and these kind of brochures that were given out to people. And then this photo over here is when the Westway opened. There was a lot of protests, obviously, and when people realised that their houses and their parks were going to be demolished. In fact, where I live in East London now would also have been demolished. In Dalston, they would have knocked down the entire district to build the road. So obviously, a lot of people were unhappy about that, and the plan came to a halt. But also, again, leaving some fragments, this is the barrier, so-called barrier block in Brixton, where they thought that the motorway would go past, which is why you can see the kind of austere design of this part of the estate with very small windows. They wanted that to act as a baffle against the noise. And on a similar tack, well, you've seen the cover of the book, and this is more of the Lomex plan, the Lower Manhattan Expressway, which came in the 70s, masterminded by Paul Rudolph. So the plan was to demolish lots of the Lower East Side and to build essentially two freeways that would go from the Holland Tunnel on the west of Manhattan down towards the Brooklyn Bridge and Manhattan Bridge over to Brooklyn. Obviously, there's been so many freeway plans in the US and the UK and Germany and everywhere over this period. The Lomex plan stands out, and I put it in the book because I think this was one of the most grandiose and kind of ambitious plans, obviously, to knock down and to put the freeway in, but then also to erect these superstructures. And in fact, one of the designs then appears on the cover of Rayner Banham's megastructure book in the 70s. So the project has obviously really kind of opened people's eyes and captured the imagination. I think it's worth noting as well that the drawings that Paul Rudolph's studio were putting out were very, very impressive, and I wanted to have some examples in the book. These are beautifully detailed drawings from the era before computers, where the architects were really working incredibly with pencils and pens and paper to create these visions. And part of what I want to talk about in the book is what I mentioned before, how these visions were sold to people, how they were visualized. You try to create an impression of what's not there, and to sort of tell people what the idea would look like, and ultimately what the future would look like. And this one here is the image that was on the cover of Rayner Banham's megastructure book in, I think, about 1976. Back to the UK, the next one is Civilia, which I talked to Cliff about before. So this was an idea for a new town, which would be built in the Midlands, near to Nuneaton, in these former quarries. What they, I guess, were thinking about here was how could we do a new town in a better way, and also how could we bring a kind of vibrant urbanism to kind of suburban Britain. So this is an interesting idea because it's kind of a bit of a playful one. It was concocted by the Architecture Review's publisher Hubert de Cronin Hastings, who gave himself a pseudonym, Ivor de Wolf, when he proposed this. And the subtitle of Civilia was The End of Suburban Man. So it was this idea that they would be, trying to make something which was better than the suburbs, which had been criticised by the likes of Ian Nairn very recently, and in a book about Civilia, there's a term which really stood out to me, which I also mentioned in the introduction, which was this idea of maximum civic drama, the idea of placing the city centre where maximum civic drama might be achieved. And I thought that could even be a potential title for my book, Maximum Civic Drama, or even the name of a kind of electro-pop band or something. I think it's great. But I mean, this really epitomizes that idea of maximum civic drama, trying to create something which really is special and eye-catching. And also, again, like the visuals, from this era have really, they really got to me when I was researching this. I couldn't stop searching for them, and I think the use of collage in these is really startling. How they're putting these kind of just normal-looking people who they look like they've just stumbled out of Sainsbury's into this very exciting world. You can see this in a lot of those plans, a lot of the visualizations of the plans where you see people in these otherworldly kind of Jetsons-y worlds. The Smithsons were having a good old joke when they were doing this as well. They'd put Marilyn Monroe in their collages and stuff like that, which I thought was great. And they're also putting existing buildings in this, so you can kind of play the game of spotting here's Habitat 67, or here's Queen Elizabeth Hall, South Bank Centre, kind of overlaid onto this suburban landscape. And it wouldn't be a visualization without water. Lakes, marinas, and boats always feature in these visualizations. Homo ludens, the man and woman of leisure, would be able to sail their boat to wherever they wanted to go. And who could blame them? I'd love to do that as well. Some of the ideas are more, shall we say, achievable than others. I lead you to the Manhattan Dome, Buckminster Fuller's idea to put a dome over Midtown Manhattan. What can you say, really? I guess, it comes from that era when it seemed like anything was possible. So why not put a dome over Midtown Manhattan? And then, again, thinking about visuals and thinking about this idea of trying to create something which is maybe a bit glitzy and glamorous. I think the way that Archigram visualized their ideas was really, really interesting. The one on the bottom right is for Monte Carlo, and then you have the walking city on the right and the plug-in city. The walking city on the left and the plug-in city on the right. So, yeah, I mean, they were trying to, sort of, I guess, use pop culture, use that kind of visual imagery. They printed their own magazines and things. So it was, I guess, an attempt to bring those ideas to life. So let's move to Yorkshire. This one is the Sheffield mini tram. I'm sure some of you will recognise this is it, travelling over the, I won't say it in Yorkshire, but the hole in the road, round about there. That's the one that used to have fish tanks, isn't it? I think. Piranha fish, exactly. Unfortunately, I don't remember those days. It wasn't piranhas, was it?
Yes, no.
Was it?
Yes.
Oh, amazing.
They're not very big.
Okay.
Yes. But big fish tank.
Incredible. I wonder if the piranhas would have liked the tram going over their heads. I'm not sure. So yeah, there was a plan. We were talking about Leeds, rapid transport in Leeds earlier. Leeds is a huge city without a kind of effective rapid transit network, one of the largest in Europe, and the same was true of Sheffield as well. So what should we do about it? Well, back in 1975, our RMJM came up with this plan for essentially a monorail. It makes me think of the Simpsons monorail episode. I think, really, those things are basically what you get at Gatwick Airport. You know, if you're going from the south to north terminal at Gatwick Airport, it basically looks like that to me. This was an idea about how they could do a tramway. So they wanted to do these like small trams. Maybe you could call it like a PRT, personal rapid transit system. And obviously, as we know, Sheffield got a tram system later, the super tram. And if you read the book, you can see my joke about super trams and super tramp, the 70s rock band, which I won't do, but you can read that later. Before we move on to Leeds, there's also we didn't get them loaded into the presentation, but I also talked about Will Alsop's ideas for Bradford and Barnsley, so they're talked about in the book as well. Will came up with the idea for turning Barnsley into a kind of Tuscan hill town like Lucca or something, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. I think Will Alsop's a fantastic guy, very fun. I love how he just smoked all the time, didn't really seem to care about what people thought. He was a very interesting guy. And then for my hometown, Bradford, he came up with a plan for the City Hall Square and redeveloping that idea. Redeveloping that area. So finally, let's move on to Leeds. So I wanted to focus on an idea which had been in my mind since I was at uni here, and it was the idea of the levels and the walkways. I was walking down the Red Route, level 7 corridor every day, wondering about the numbering system and wondering about the kind of connections in the city. When I first moved here, the subways at the Merrion Centre and around Wade Lane had been closed, but you could still look into them and you could see the old adverts. And I was thinking a lot about about that. And of course, then the skyways, which ran around City Square and then extended towards Infirmary Street and connected the Boar Lane shopping centre. We managed to get some great photos from Cliff again. Thank you for your help, Cliff. And obviously, the plan in Leeds was that the walkways would go further. The offices had to be built with entrances at the first floor. I'm sure we all know that story, and you can still see some vestiges of those office buildings. Other cities in the UK, like Liverpool and Bristol and Newcastle, also had these ideas, and in London as well. There was the pedway system in the City of London, and nowhere really got very far with them. A lot of them have been torn down, so now you can just see these very interesting kind of walkways that go nowhere, and I think it's fascinating as a flaneur, which I'm sure we all love to walk around cities and look at buildings and wonder about why things are the way they are. It's fascinating to kind of see the relics of these ideas and to look at how the planners wanted it to be. And then obviously in Leeds they went further with this idea of renumbering. So we would have the level 0 down here, and then it would go up the hill, which is why a lot of students are very confused at Leeds University. Why do you go in at level 7 and you come out at level 10? It's a lot to deal with. Maybe we don't think in 3D. Jonathan Meades talks about that. Like it's very hard for us to conceptualize those things. When you see a desire line, you know that people don't really want to go into a subway or over a pedway or something. So yeah, this is one example with Leeds. While we're talking about City Square, I also briefly mentioned and rapid transport as well. The proposal to have a pre-metro tram system, I guess, which would have converged on City Square with the underground station. That was another Leeds project that was unrealised. And a further one that I wondered about when I was at university was the bridge over the I don't know where it changes from the A64 to A58M, but anyway, over the inner ring road, the unused bridges which were used as car parks. I always wondered about those, and actually Cliff educated me in the story of the Headingley Expressway plan, which was never realised as well. So to bypass Headingley and then for that road to come in on those two bridges by the old BBC at the inner ring road, and again, we can see evidence of that with some of the buildings in Headingley being misaligned because they would have linked up to the new road. So yeah, there's everywhere you look, I think you can find a lot of these unbuilt projects. So I urge you to look and see those things. And here we have just a couple more of the photos, and I love this one. That's Park Row, isn't it? Is that Park Row? Yeah, the bridge over Park Row with the that's Norwich Union building, isn't it, on the left? Yeah. So it's.
Did a bird get in the way there as well?
Yeah, that's a pigeon. That's a pigeon.
Ah, right.
Exactly. Yeah. I love it. And I don't know why I'm mentioning this, but I noticed this earlier today. I used to have a toy van. I don't know what this brand of delivery, what was this, like Arrow delivery firm, but I had a toy van of one of the, I can't remember what the company was called, but White Arrow. White Arrow, yeah, I had one of those when I was growing up, I remember. So there's the cover again, and here's my details. Thank you all so much for listening. And I think we're going to do some questions now. Cheers. Do you want to come and sit over here?
Yeah, let's do that. Fantastic. Thanks a lot for that, Chris. Yeah, that was
problem.
A real tour de force of like places and ideas. So just thought I'd kick off with a few questions and then open it up to everyone else. I think we've got at least half an hour.
Half an hour,
yeah, easily. So I thought maybe I'd start where you started with your that conclusion to your introduction, which I thought was quite a rousing kind of almost call to arms.
Arousing?
Rousing. No way, just R. To think of, allow architecture to sort of be bold and express sort of hopes and dreams, which is quite motivating. And I think, in the book you do show how certainly in the 20th century people were utopian, were quite futurist, really believed in the idea that the future could be better and that these visions were part of how that better future could be realised. And it was all maybe motivated by a sense that affluence would continue growing and there'd be more and more leisure time and technology would advance rapidly. I just wonder whether clearly that hit a bit of a roadblock maybe in the later century, sense that things became a bit more backward looking, a bit more historicist. Do you think we're going back to a more utopian, optimistic vision of the future now in a kind of era of climate emergency, or do you still think we can't think in such a utopian, optimistic way? It's a question about optimism, really. Like, do we still have the optimism that we've seen in some of your case studies? Yeah,
it's a really interesting point, David. And I think you can see elements of that optimism when you look at maybe the things that are coming out of Silicon Valley, possibly, like Hyperloop and that sort of thing. But I would say generally, I think we're a lot more kind of worried about the future now, aren't we? Like, we hear a lot about the climate emergency and how we need to think about the planet. And I think, like, definitely when I was delving into the archives, I saw so much optimism and so much kind of utopianism in the past. Even look at things like, I love the idea of expos and world's fairs, the way that they were kind of showcasing this like unlimited potential for the future. I think is really, really, really interesting. I think we maybe we should try and discover a little bit more optimism for the future. But obviously, there's a lot of things that we need to deal with, isn't there? It's a big problem.
I guess it's easily parodied because probably the most futuristic thing I've seen recently is Mark Zuckerberg's metaverse, which I guess is easy to parody, but maybe in the future there'll be a talk where someone will present an image, a video of that.
Yeah. Well,
that's crazy. What to me looked crazy and a bit ridiculous, but maybe that is the utopian vision that we should be.
And I think that's a really good point, because I sort of think if you think about the future now, you kind of think of Black Mirror or something, don't you? It's that kind of vision often,
rather than us all becoming sort of big, I don't know, animals
boaters
and meeting and being aliens and meeting our friends in a virtual world. Fantastic. So I guess that brings me to another question or observation on kind of on like technology. So sort of also struck me that a lot of these visions were almost attempts to reconstruct cities around emerging technologies or make cities fit them better. So where it's the car, the radio, the television, nuclear energy. And there was kind of an extraordinary sense that you could reshape the way we move, the way we work, the way we live around these new technologies. Sense now, though, that maybe we expect technologies to fit in more seamlessly. There's less of a belief that we can reconstruct on such a great scale that we did for example, the car back then. But I guess my question is more, were they really driven by a sort of, I don't know, was it technology that was driving this, or were there other forces? Like, have you thought about, I don't know, questions that sort of social or economic questions or cultural questions? It may vary between projects, but just that question of, was this all about accommodating new technology, or were they trying to create a better world socially, economically? Because one example was that Midlands kind of Newtown point talked about creating a vibrant urban scene, which is a bit of a contrast to some of these visions of expressways and kind of efficiency and, so what's the balance, I guess, between like social and technological drivers of all of this?
I think there's so many different projects and there's so many different ideas. You can find ones that are addressing all those different points. Yeah, ones where these total projects where you're accommodating, like you say, the car or something, or something like a new town, which is, obviously got the social ideas underpinning it. Obviously, architects and planners are in the business trying to create these new visions and these new ideas, and also, some of the things I was talking about as well was about things like artists as well. Like, when they're trying to create giant sculptures or like huge works of art as well, some of which were completed and some of which weren't. When people were proposing the Statue of Liberty or the Angel of the North, those projects would have looked quite crazy, and obviously there was lots of other ones that weren't completed as well. So there's lots of variety, but I think I wanted to sort of think about that idea of all the variation, but also the fact that the idea of failing, I think, is really interesting. Like how, whether you're trying to create a city based on the car and then that doesn't work, or whether you're trying to create a sort of social utopia, a new town, and then that doesn't work, or you're trying to create a giant artwork and that doesn't work. Like, you have to attempt these things, and even if they don't work, at least you've made an attempt. I think, with anything in life, you have to have a crack, don't you? Otherwise, the only way that you find a kind of progression or success is from having these ideas. A lot of kind of again, sort of Silicon Valley people talk about the importance of failure and how you learn from that. So I think what I wanted to do in a way with this book is to say, well, okay, these things didn't happen, but what can we learn from them? And can we say that even though they're failures, actually there's something in the trying, something in the visualizing that's worth celebrating?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, that was almost going to be my third question, really, because it's interesting that you've called it unbuilt, I suppose, rather than failures, or you've said visions of the future that never arrived. But actually, they're unbuilt, they did massively impact people's imagination. Yeah. They were provocations, some of them, in a way. Maybe some of them weren't intended to be built, or that the architect was aware there was a limited chance, but they've affected the way things were built on a smaller scale, or they maybe went further, but they espoused certain ideas. I think for me that's a better way of. I mean, I guess failure has been rehabilitated as a word, but if that's a negative, it's maybe that's not what they are. They kind of they're attempts to think about things differently that did have an impact, even if the thing in the plan wasn't actually built. Yeah. In some ways, you could say isn't really the point of them. Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I was originally going to call it Building Dreams. That was going to be the title of it. So it was about this idea of building these kind of these maybe ideas that were nebulous, maybe like people didn't always know what they were going to be, it's I think the exactly the idea of whether something happens or it doesn't happen is I think it's worth investigating, but I think it's also worth saying as well that we've concentrated a lot on that kind of modernist period. I know we're all modernists, all modernists in the room.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah.
About to find
If anyone
out.
is here,
We're
speak
about to
now.
find out, yeah.
Speak now. So I think that was the most kind of fecund period. But actually, throughout history, I was talking about, ideas that people had for new cities in the 1400s, or even, a couple of years ago, they wanted to build a kind of sky cycle way over the railways in London. So right from that kind of period when we started to dream about things up until now, like people have had these visions, and they're of all shades and character, really.
Absolutely. And some of them kind of come into practice over time, like some of sort of Frank Lloyd Wright's visions did in some ways modern America with its sort of ex-urban sprawl does actually look like his 1920s or earlier visions. So
it does, exactly. He was ahead of his time.
Yeah, it was almost a prognosis rather than a plan. So before I open it up, we've got one last smaller question, which I don't know whether you've reflected on. Just one thing that struck me when you were showing some of those Birmingham images is that it's kind of like a generational question around modernism, which I think is always a good sort of theme to talk about, which is that it's interesting to see images of the plans for things that were built but have now been demolished. But for people that never actually saw them, it's almost like seeing something that never was built.
Yeah.
So there's a sort of different perspective based on whether, I never saw that Birmingham library, so looking at that for me is almost like looking at some of those other fantastical, even it's not that fantastical.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, I don't know, they almost inspire the same emotions as the things that didn't happen, and so that's a peculiar thing, because unlike other heritage, modernism isn't really valued in the same way yet. So these, you're right, exactly. And I think those, I guess I wanted to kind of showcase some of the things that I found really, really interesting. You're right, the Birmingham one is really good. Andy Hallett has made a film called Paradise Lost about the library and its demise, which is a great film that I'm sure you would all enjoy watching. And he has a lot of the drawings in that which showed these really elaborate water gardens that were supposed to happen. And actually the reality last time I went to the library was like this kind of stagnant water with a child's toy pram kind of like upended into it. So I think that disconnect between the vision and the reality is really interesting. But also, you're right, when the things don't exist anymore, then we have these as the kind of memories, I guess, of like what was artifacts or something.
the artifacts exactly of like what was there, which is really, really interesting, because a lot of people would, the kids in Birmingham will grow up and say, well, actually, like what is that crazy looking building that Dad keeps talking about?
And with the sort of social and public spirited sort of ethos, it's almost, that's to some extent gone. So the idea of I know there is actually a big swanky library there, to be debated whether it's a good replacement, but sometimes these things have gone, like Lido's, where there is no replacement. So it's almost the social goals are just as utopian now, even though they actually did exist for 40 years. So that was an interesting reflection.
Yeah, and I think that's I know what you mean with that as well, because I think like I love this idea of like looking around the city. As a writer, I feel very inspired by when you feel that something was there. I think we were talking about the idea of like when you see gaps, or with the Lido, you kind of see the shape of where the Lido was or something. Finding those kind of those relics in the city of what was imagined, I think is super, super interesting. Like in Berlin, they have the heavy object, which is this huge concrete cylinder that they sank to see if the ground in Berlin could support the buildings of Germania, Albert Speer's crazy plan to rebuild Berlin. So they sank this concrete block, which if anyone knows Berlin, you will not be surprised that the concrete block sank because Berlin is built on marsh.
Wow.
Germania was completely unbuildable, and the concrete block is still there. They can't blow it up because it's too
underground.
It's too heavy and it's too big. But that's just an example that you can just find when you're kind of looking around cities.
I suppose with that one, probably most people would agree positive that it didn't occur.
I think we can all agree that was one that
some of these
should
things,
never have
some of them would have
happened.
been good, but not that.
Yeah.
All right, so